So welcome back to the post-lunch session. So before we announce the speaker, let me just have a quick announcement. So we'll have a group photograph taken after this talk. So around 3:30, we have asked Srimati Gayatri, who's our media in charge, to take a group photo. So she will decide where exactly would be the optimal location. Either it would be just in front of the auditorium complex, or it could be in front of the library. So we'll see, like when finally people are assembled, how large a space we need. So just, be around the entrance to this auditorium around 3:30 so that we could all get assembled in a quick time and get the photo done. All right. So it's my pleasure to now, introduce speaker for the current session, Professor Mayank Vahia, formerly of the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research. So Mayank is an astronomer. However, through his interest in arcane astronomy, he went into the area of Indus Valley civilization and has subsequently done seminal work on this area. And today he will be speaking on, going more beyond the specific context of Indus Script to look at how do we connect the script to its culture. So without further ado, let me invite Mayank to give his.
Thank you very much, Sitabra. First of all, thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here and to talk in conference on bits and script. And apart from sounding nice, I think it's an interesting title. The interesting thing is that the duration of any information and the medium on which you write is inversely proportional. Stone inscriptions can be read for 5,000 years, but something read on a floppy disk can't be read for more than 10 years. But that's a question. 10 years if you're lucky, exactly, and paper is few hundred years and so on. Anyway, so when Sitabra told me to attend this conference, and I'm grateful for that, I was wondering about what this writing and script mean. Essentially, writing and script are writing and language are not related. They're independent inventions driven by various reasons why writing is invented. Sitabra talked to you about history of writing, but there are philosophical aspects about what writing means. Why is it invented? How is it invented? Why do you select a particular style of writing? In that sense, language helps to decide the kind of style of writing you'll write. But otherwise, writing is an independent entity. Devanagari you can use for all the Indian languages. Roman alphabet you can use for all the European languages and so on. So there's a very ambivalent relation between writing and language. The other problem is when you come across a culture like the Harappan culture, whose only evidence is archaeological and no other evidence exists. And then you have a script which is even more cryptic, and Nisha in the morning showed you how tricky the whole thing has become about reading the Indus script. You start getting questions about writing, language, reading, meaning, purpose of writing. And I'm going to talk about some of these issues using Harappan script as the underlying example. So the first question, as soon as I get this working, is just to take a note. So Nisha Yadav, Sitabra, others have done a lot of work on Indus script. Nisha and I started 2006 or something. It's been a long journey. But I'm going to talk about a wider issue of what is writing and use Harappan civilization as a context for that. And so I will look at those issues. But Harappan writing has a very peculiar set of difficulties. The first thing is the sheer compactness of writing, and that everything was written on miniatures. And then we'll try and put the whole thing in context. And I would like to begin by paying my respect to Airavatham Mahadevan, a resident of Chennai who passed away 2 or 3 years ago. And he is by far the greatest scholar in the field of Harappan script. So he first encouraged gift ceremony. A young man died very early, but did some very early work on digitization of Indus Script. Then, of course, we were there. Sitabra was there. We have all benefited from his learning. And that is a little whiteboard in my office where he sat and explained the whole thing to us. So we are talking about miniatures and writing. India's miniatures are a very peculiar set of objects. Okay. And that seems to have been their choice of expression. They loved miniatures and they stuck with miniature. And the size was what, 1.5 to 15 centimeters. 15 centimeters was itself unusual. 3 to 5 centimeters was their common choice of seals on which they wrote, whatever they choose, whether they used copper or whether they used terracotta, they wrote on about 5 centimeter size things. The miniatures were also used for such a large variety of purposes that you have no clue how many things they did with that. Okay, apart from writing, they did a lot of interesting things on these miniatures. But almost all the written material is on the miniatures. Some of these miniatures have holding at the back, which seems to suggest that it was probably used as a rubber stamp. But then in that case, we haven't found as many copies of the original seal as we would have liked to. They are few and far apart. And there aren't as many of them. So they made these molds, they made the mold holdable by a grip, but they didn't emboss it to make more copies. And what they did, I do have no clue. Probably now Mahadevan has an idea. He promised to send us a mail promised to send an mail. Anyway, the story is that the medium of choice of expression for the Harappans was this, and we don't know what they were doing. So there are some of the stylistic things that they did. Okay. There is a three-headed animal. Clearly, the three animals are different. Then there is that somebody talked about the seal in the morning, about the 7 sisters and so on. And it's a very complicated seal. You can interpret it any way you like. On Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, it is an astronomy text for me. On Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, it is a funerary practice. And on Saturdays, I don't think. The other one, Mahadevan has interpreted as the first recorded bullfighting competition in India. He says this is the bull with its arrogant head and all the human beings being thrown away by the bull. This is another interesting seal with its U-shape. And these are all 5 centimeter objects, mind you. The image that you see is 3 to 5 times larger than the original object. This is what fascinated us the most. This and these 4. And Sitabra, Nisha and I have a paper on this. It is almost impossible to make this on a 3 centimeter piece of mud. You can see the geometric precision. They have never had to compromise except for a little bit here. More or less, they have managed to maintain the pattern completely all through on a 3 centimeter object without any machining or tooling technologies. And look at this. This is again 3 centimeters across. There are rings within rings with geometric precision. So even with a compass now, it would be difficult to get this kind of precision and accuracy. And this is a fascinating object because it has a geometric shape I will talk about in a minute. And this looks like a fountain. So they were doing lots of things with this medium. And as Nisha also quoted earlier, it would be no exaggeration to describe them as little masterpieces of controlled realism. They managed to put in a whole bunch of their realism within these objects. And that of monumental strength because in some sense completely out of proportion of their size, and on the other hand entirely related to it. So you could relate that bullfight without too much of difficulty, and yet it is a 3 centimeter size object, completely out of proportion to what the real event must have been like, and yet a complete representation of that reality. And that is what makes just looking at this Harappan seal so fascinating. Okay, so about the seals, they are a masterful combination of artistic imagination, high speed, high degree of precision, creative technology, objective clarity, and they express themselves almost exclusively in the medium of terracotta pieces or copper pieces. There are no large artwork pieces from Harappa. They are all in miniatures. There is some claim of a game board being found in Dholavira, but again those examples are, and that would be about 15 centimeters by 15 centimeters, but those are very rare. It's a culture that simply loved miniatures. Nowhere in the entire human civilization do you find this kind of obsession with miniatures. So the kind of rolled seal that Nisha showed you, those kind of seals were made by Mesopotamian contemporaneous to Harappans, but really nobody used them as extensively as the Harappans did. Mesopotamia does have some rotating miniature seals, and the Harappan seals have a parallel development, but there's nothing like this anywhere. And this is the thing that I'm talking about. This little 3 tiger heads over here had this pattern in the middle. That pattern is similar to the pattern over here, and that pattern is not a random pattern. It is the way circles are fitted to give you the pattern you need, and it is also on large scale objects, which is very rare, like I said, for Harappans. There is a very nice water jug from Harappa which also has the same patterns. And imagining this kind of geometry is not easy. We are talking about an extremely sophisticated civilization with a great understanding of geometry, all of which remains ununderstood. There are also other parts. There are unusual animals. There's an animal like this, a tiger-human interface. This is another one. Nisha showed you this, so I'm going to skip that, but you can see the number of complex animals that are built in it. Unicorn, for example, the one that I like the most, is a horse with a horn, which obviously doesn't exist. Even in Harappan, people have searched for skulls of the horse, the wild asses, etc. There is absolutely no evidence of an animal of that kind. So what are seals? Why choose seals? First of all, they are easy to carry. You can carry them around wherever you want. They are easy to make under expert training. Once you have learned the trick, you will love this medium. Indian miniature paintings, for example, are also famous, but they are much larger than this. The kind of sophistication that Harappans had is not there. On the other hand, they didn't have the kind of details that Indian miniature paintings have. They were temper-proof. It is very difficult to sort of erase part of the writing and stuff like that, and therefore they were temper-proof. They were difficult to create and replicate unless you knew exactly what you were doing, or unless you had the original mold or something. So they were unique in many sense of the word, and they're an explicit proof in some sense of centralized training, because you cannot say everything that you want to say in say 4 or 5 signs, and everybody expect somebody 1,000 kilometers away to understand, unless somebody has a dictionary to know the meaning of each of the sign. The more compact your information, the bigger is the dictionary you need to read what is written. And so almost certainly Harappans must have had a centralized training. Harappan civilization is known for its spread of more than 1 million square kilometers, and yet highly standardized in terms of brick sizes, writing style, the knives that they use, the weight balances that they use. There are 14 characteristics which are common to all Harappan sites, spread over 1 million square kilometers. Clearly they had somebody to whom this information was being transported. Okay. In the absence of evidence of standing army, it must be assumed that all this was done by consensus. There is very little evidence of army in Harappan civilization, practically none. Okay. This itself speaks a lot about what culture you are talking about. Again, a few more seals, but this time there is something more to it, and that is that there is writing on the top. So there are writing over here, there is writing over here, and so on. And then there is this tiger. So this particular motif of a tiger whose head is turned and a person on the top is a seal that has been seen in many cases. There are 2 cases over here. There is also this great human killing 2 tigers, and this probably has been compared with Gilgamesh story that was mentioned in the morning. You have another example of that kind of thing. In this case, the face is actually seen. Here it is not seen. And there are a lot of other animals. So something very, very obviously profound was going on as far as these seals were concerned. So the script. Now the first thing you realize is that writing is something that encounters a language from the outside, rather than flowing directly from inside. Language does not lead to script. Even today we have Konkani language in Maharashtra, which doesn't have a script. They use their Nagari script, but that is a recent medicine. So there is no written literature of early Konkani language because it was not written. The formal script encodes formal information. You decide you have information which you cannot now transmit simply by talking or discussion or even messengers, you start worrying about putting it in a manner where that material can be carried unambiguously. You want to make sure that the matter is formal. You want to make sure that the matter is written in a unambiguous manner and that it is transported over long distances. Writing system can code multiple languages, like I said. So, writing is probably intended for a variety of purposes. It can aid memory. If I don't remember something, I write it down and keep it to make sure that I remember. It can mark ownership. I can write my name on the things that belong to me. I can use it for trading. I can use it for accounting. The early writing almost certainly was commercial. It was not, in case of Harappa, it was definitely not invented to express ideas in writing. The average size scale is 5 signs per writing. Maximum is 16 on one side, 24 total. And the average is about 5.3 or something. And there are many seals of just one sign. So it was definitely not a poetry writing competition by any stretch of imagination. This is most evidence when you consider that the modern human languages, mathematics for example, is extremely common. The best of the human languages, mathematics is so much more compact. And reading it out is so much more complicated than it does. And yet it is so complex. So the closest you have is something like this, but it's clearly not numeric system, and I'll show you evidence of that. It was used to express ideas. The idea that writing can be used to express thought is not something the Harappans used. When they had thoughts, they probably drew and did abstract activities. So why write? The practice of writing and the development of a coherent system of sign or a script is something that is seen in complex society. Writing is a feature of civilization. You will not bother to write until you become a civilization. A culture will not write, a society will not write, a group of people living together in a commune will not write. Writing is needed when you become civilization. It is large, it is complex, it has multiple rules, multiple organizational features, and multiple development sources and all that. Until civilization comes, writing doesn't come. We write for 3 primary reasons. One is to aid memory and mark ownership. One is to communicate over long distances. And the third is for trading arithmetic. I'm sending 5 kilos of onions and you send me 3 kilos of potatoes or whatever. The speculation on the Harappan writing are the following. Some people have suggested that they were taxed for securing goods and storage rooms and stuff like that. I'm leaving so much of material in a store or whatever. Identification material saying that this particular package has this particular material in it. Token as primitive coinage saying that against this coin you give me so much of barter, and there is a set of some 30 odd seals of just 3 symbols which seem to at one place at one time, which might potentially have been something similar like this. Religious purposes as amulets for protection etc. could have been also used. But I mean, it's obvious that if you take each of these, you will find counterexamples in the Harappan civilization to show that this cannot be the only purpose. The medium that they used was temper-proof and durable, and they also, we really do not know what Harappan spoke. Like I said, all the evidence for Harappan civilization is archaeological. We have absolutely no literary or other evidence. The later on Vedic people who come have no idea that their cities existed in this place and so on. And I will show you there are a lot of reasons where Vedic people could not have known about the Harappans. The only evidence we have is this archaeological. Okay. So a piece of writing in Harappa has 3 components. One is the script itself that I showed you. The second, in many cases, I don't remember the statistics, but I think about 40-50% of the cases, you get an animal drawn underneath, and there is some kind of jar in front which has been suggested to be a feeding cup, but each animal has its own unique feeding cup, as it were, and we have no clue what it means. We have many seals with only 1 or 2 items. There are seals where there's only script. There are seals where there are only animals, but there are never a seal with only the feeding cup. I think except maybe one or two examples where there's only a feeding cup and the written on the top. But that is very rare. In most cases, if you have an animal, chances are that you will have a feeding cup. You can have script alone, you can have animal alone, but feeding cup alone is, like I said, very rare. The writing contains somewhere between 20 and 650 signs depending on who you ask. The same little bit of writing, depending on who you ask, will count anything from 650 signs in Harappan writing. Same corpus, same photograph, same seals, same objects. Somebody will say it has 650 signs and somebody else will say it is 20 signs. The reason is that there is this addendum. Nisha showed you that table where there were 21 additives that went only on those signs. If you don't know Hindi, Hindi has 650 signs. I actually sat and counted because ka, ka, ki, ke, ko, everything becomes a separate letter, separate sign. So if you have an Abugida language or a language or four where consonants and verbs are mixed, consonants and anyway. The sound, the A, E, I, O, U is mixed with A, B, C, D. Now in English they keep it separate, so we know it is 26 letters at the most. If you take capitals separately, twice that much. But in Abugida languages where consonants and the sound are mixed, A, I, will look different from ka, ka, ki, etc. And you will end up with 650 signs. Madhavan himself preferred 478 signs. And he says maybe there is one more sign. In his introduction, he writes about one more sign. But the number has not gone up much. But there are people who have used the same corpus, same catalog and said, no, there are 650 signs and so on. So we don't even know how many signs are there in writing. The writing, those who claim the smallest number claim basically that the script is Abugida. It mixes consonants and vowels. That is what I was looking for. Consonants and vowels are mixed. And therefore you apparently have 650 signs, just as Hindi would have 600 odd signs. Not because it has 600 odd characters, but because it is Abugida. This suggests that the script was Abugida. And I must confess that even Nisha is not really convinced that I say this, the statement is correct. So not many people take this, but this is my personal opinion that this mixes vowels and consonants, and that is why we have so many signs. Mathematics, for example, there are many obvious examples of Abugida in English language. When you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, you can write at least 1, 2, 3, 4. But for example, in Roman numerals, you combine the two sticks of 2 together to make you 5 in a V shape and so on, where you have mergers of signs to get higher values. It is extremely useful for coding languages. One of the nice thing that Abugida does is it keeps the pronunciation inside, which purely alphabetic languages don't. The writing is highly ordered. Nisha gave you a whole 1.5 hour lecture on that. I hardly need to talk about it. It is both highly ordered and yet flexible. It is written from right to left. We have fairly good evidence that it is written from right to left. Some 20% of the seals I think are ambiguous, but otherwise it is written from right to left. And that is probably they were chiseling. So if you are chiseling and doing, then it's easy to write right to left because you can read what is written. It is always a small string, like I said, average is 5. We know of a transition from Potter's mark to complete script, and I will show you. And the transition is very swift. Nisha showed you that it's a matter of, I will show you the slides again. It's a matter of few decades before at the most a couple of 100 years before they go into from Potter's mark to writing. And the language disappears also as dramatically. So between the last of Harappan writing to the first of Brahmi writing, there is a 1,000-year period when nobody wrote anything. And that means we have no continuity. The writing was highly standardized in terms of even the size of each character, the shape of each character and so on over the entire region of Harappan civilization. And this is important because Harappan civilization was 1.5 million square kilometers, somewhere between 1 and 1.5 million square kilometers depending on who you ask. It went from southern Gujarat to Kashmir. It went from eastern Pakistan to the run of Kutch. The sign designs are very similar. Okay, Nisha showed you that region to region variations are really very small. The medium of writing is very similar. Most of the writing is in terracotta and then either baked or pre-baked or in post-baking and so on. And the sequence of texting is similar. So the grammar is fairly well known, as Nisha showed you. The signs that seem to have been used only locally are very few and far, very rare, genuinely very rare. So evolution of writing, Nisha showed you this slide. Harappan civilization's first urbanization that you see, 7000 BC in somewhere over here is the first Harappan site. And then by 3200 BC, they have come to both the Gangetic plain and to probably another river that was floating here called Gagarakra. But they discovered both these regions and they spread. So by 7000 to 3200 BC, they spread, but they still don't write. So potter's work, etc. come in. Well, they are sufficiently settled and they start making pottery and stuff like that. And that is when you get the first set of pre-firing graffiti. So the pot was made, signs were made, and then it was baked to give you the hardened thing. But there is no grammar in this. The grammar comes between 2500 and 2800 BC, in a period of 300 years or less. The spread is much larger. Now we are talking about going all the way from the entire Pakistan even into Afghanistan and on the east to the east of the Gagarakra river. The Indus River is here. Gagarakra was supposed to have flown like that. They probably found it difficult to go further east because the jungles were thick. But now you have proper grammatic writing. Nisha showed you several examples of taking these signs and showing how they matched and so on. From these writings, Mahadevan created the corpus, which remains by far the best corpus in this subject. There are three or four more corpuses. But you can see that he gave for each seal that he had, he wrote down the entire string that was written. Like I said, the writing is from right to left. And that is why you get this jar sign that Nisha talked about being at the end in many, many cases, but not all the cases. And the length you can see varied. So the writing, we know it has a clear semantic structure, syntactic structure. It has semantic value, we don't. It has a very clear syntactic structure. It normally has been assumed to be so people have obviously suggested that look, when you're starting to decipher an unknown script, start with numbers. Vertical signs are nice numbers. Okay. The problem with Harappans is that even vertical signs have variations in the sense that is this number 2 is the same as number 2 here because there are these 4 additives here, there are all kinds of additives over here. But even then, if you assume that this is number 1 and these are the variants of number 1, where are the variants of number 1? These two are variants of number 1 and so on. If you do that, you can make a table of the Harappan Mahadevan sign number and the number of occurrences they have. Forget reading the numbers, look at the picture. So what I have here is sign number 86 to sign number 117. So this sign represents the number 1 as I showed you. The simplest form appears 149 times, the other two appear 99 and 9188 times. The sign that appeared like 2, a particular variant of it appears for 1044 times. It appears 649 times. The second variant is 365 times. And the third variants are 29 and 1 time. On the top you have number of occurrences of 1. 1A, 1A, 1B together is 328. 2A, 2B, 2C, 2D is 1044 and so on. But you can see that if there were numbers, the usage would not be so random. You would expect at least all the centralized number ones to be used in the same manner. Even if you assume that these other things mean something else, then number 1, number 2, number 3 should have same frequency of usage, or at least a comparable frequency of usage. That is nowhere near true. So clearly, vertical strokes don't mean numbers. Okay. So the obvious landmarks that you will use for decipherment are not available. Okay. There seems to be a complex relations between writing and animal motifs. Yes. Sorry?
Frequency doesn't have to be uniform, right? For it to be...
No, not absolutely uniform, but you surely don't have this kind of difference where number 1 appears 649 times and number 9 or 10 appears once or 0 times. I mean, if I'm doing trading, all kinds of numbers will come. No? Everything will not be 1 kilo.
So, for example, the frequency of 1 being so low, maybe it means that 1 is implied in many contexts. You don't need to
Yeah, so that is a question of interpretation then. If I go by purely statistical use, if I take a book of say a trader and ask how many numbers appear how many times, you'll essentially get a flat distribution. That's what I mean. See, this is too dramatic. 649 to 1. If it had been say plus minus, forget about root n. Even if it was 5 times root n, I would have believed it. But 649 to 1 is a very vast difference.
No, I don't remember.
Then if you remove 649, then also it is 365, 314. And essentially, by the way, this follows Zipf's law. I checked that. The number of, if you rank the thing, 10, this 649 is 1, then 365, 314, 149 and do that, it follows Zipf's law. I don't know why.
Accounting, sometimes you look at the statistics where you look at the first digit distribution.
Yes, so
They
what?
tend to have a very skewed distribution, right?
Yes, no, if you mean take only the first digit of the number every time. Even then, I can't think of an example unless somebody is just selling you 1 gram gold or something. I mean, typically businessmen would have fixed units because gold and silver are sold in. But even then, only 1 and 2 numbers are difficult to find out, especially given that the design in which they appear are even more complicated.
Sorry?
The design with which they appear, like this fellow, is it really a number is almost impossible to guess, because the protrusion you see is actually an independent sign. Okay, so this, for example, is a known additive amongst the 21 Nisha listed out. Okay, so clearly this means number plus whatever that additive was supposed to mean. This means the number 3 plus whatever additive that was supposed to mean, even if you assume that 3 is a number. That is where the problem comes in. And the fact that we have only 5,000 odd writing doesn't really help. Okay, so I just wanted to show you this example that we don't know what is going on, and obvious rules are not going to work. There is a complex relations between writing and animal motifs, and I'm not going to talk about it simply because I'm not competent, but there is Bhaskar here who lives in Chennai who has done some beautiful work in associating these animal motifs to writing, something that is unique because Mahadevan and other people have also ignored this possible relation between animal motifs and the writing. And Bhaskar has some very nice ideas and statistics about what the relation may be. Similarly, the writing, similarity with written writing doesn't exist. So people have tried to interpret this as Dravidian, people have tried to interpret it as Sanskrit. There are people who can read whole Sanskrit shlok from Rigveda in those 5 letters and stuff like that. But that's obviously way beyond reality. Dravidian and Sanskrit, 2 models have been tried, and it's easier to show that they fail rather than succeed. There have been more than 100, more like 150 interpretations of the writing. Everything from somebody claiming that is completely random gibberish, to somebody claiming that is all numbers and numerics, to somebody claiming that it is various known and unknown languages, etc. The linguistic models do not stand up. So you assign meanings to it and say, okay, fine, I assign, say, arbitrarily 10 meanings to 10 signs. And they say what is the relation expected between the 10. And the patterns don't match. What Nisha says and what these interpreters say are at variance. And it's easy to show that, unfortunately. All of them fail to meet the strict criteria of what the writing should be. Okay, so this is, for example, Mahadevan's again sign list Nisha showed you. I've shown only 50, and I've shown you his corpus. And published in 1977, it still remains a classic. There is not more than 10% addition to 10 or 15% addition to this corpus since he wrote it. These are the things that Nisha again showed you. If you look at these signs in Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, you can see that the usage is more or less standard except for minor variants in smaller signs. Similarly, if you take text beginners, they are essentially the same everywhere. Text enders are the same everywhere. The standardization over 1 million square kilometers is not so easy. Even Hindi numerals, the way they are, now of course Government of India forces everybody to use Roman numerals, but otherwise the number written in in Hindi is very different from the one written in Marathi and one written in Gujarati and so on. We can't standardize over our nation unless you artificially rule it. And here they had a standardization without a central army imposing the whole thing So these are the various corpuses that have come up. Hunter's corpus 3134, he had 750 objects. He had no clue what they were, and he said there were 288 signs and 149 signs at variance. Mahadevan M77 comes in 19. Maregi has one in 1934, 750 pieces, and he says there are 270 signs. Mahadevan's 1977 corpus, 2006, it was the most recent version was published. 3,537 texts with total number of signs as 13,000, and he says there are 417 signs plus 2 additional signs and so on. Parpola more or less co-published or just before Mahadevan did, or Mahadevan and Parpola essentially talk to each other all the time, and you can see that Mahadevan had 2,900 objects, he had 3,200 objects. Since then the number of objects has gone up from about 3,000 to 4,500. And the number of signs you can suggest has gone up from 288 signs to Mahadevan's 417 to 676 or even 704 signs, depending on who you talk to. But the number of written material was 13,000 for Mahadevan and 19,000 for full. So the data is there. Whatever data we could accumulate, and the amount of data changes are not significant. So writing and animal motifs, like I said, I'm going to refer you to Bhaskar for more work that he has done. If you want, you can contact him. But the unicorn, for example, had a variety of decorations, variety of stripes, variety of ornaments and so on. This is documented by Parpola, and you could see that these animals, and we don't know why, that they were just not unicorn motifs, but those unicorn motifs also had different designs within them for reasons we do not know. And this is Bhaskar's work completely, and where he talks about these various signs and motifs that come with that, and he identifies various linguistic structures and all that go into it. But that's not what we are talking about today. We are talking about script and Harappan, or writing in general. Script unfortunately suddenly disappears in 1700 BC. There is no written material from after 1700 BC, and the next script, Brahmi, doesn't come up till 300 BC or 400 if you want to be generous. Essentially, Harappan civilization ends at that time. Okay, so the last of the urban centers in Harappa is seen around 1700 BC. After that, there are some villages that seem to have survived for a little bit, but not long. Why they disappeared is a mystery, because there was certainly no violence anywhere. None of these cities were destroyed by war. It was also not one site at a time. Within a matter of a couple of 100 years, all the urban sites disappeared. So it is not that one city died and then others also decided to leave or something. There have been some suggestion of natural changes, but depending on where you dig, you get different kind of evidences of monsoon failures and stuff like that. So the situation is such that you can take any argument about why Harappans died, and I'll take the opposite argument, and we'll never agree. It is that confused. Lots of data exists, but it is mutually contradictory in many cases. Economic collapses is another possibility, because Harappans were the biggest traders to West Asia, and West Asian civilization, Mesopotamia and all, died down around the same time that Harappans died. So maybe they were primarily dependent on international trade, and that collapse or the economic collapse, we don't know. There are some claims of scattered examples, but they are so far not strong evidences. So Mahadevan, for example, thought there was an axe in South India that seemed to have Harappan signs, etc. But this evidence is not very strong. There are some bronzes in Maharashtra which have been suggested. There are some artifacts in Tamil Nadu which have been suggested. But there is no strong and statistically significant evidence. The civilization appeared and disappeared as dramatically as it did, and therefore we have no idea. So let us look at writing in the context. I was telling you that writing and language are two different contents. And the problem with India, like I said, Harappan evidence is all archaeological, Vedic evidence is all literary. We really have no evidence, for example, even of a war as big as Mahabharata. And therefore it is difficult, if not outright impossible, to reconcile the two. Where Harappan civilization was certainly local, in the sense that the genetically Harappan people seem to have genetic relation to people of southeast Iran. But there is no evidence of great trades. Mesopotamia in Iraq is further away, and therefore, even though they traded, they seem to have independently developed. The writing, for example, is so different that one could not have learned from the other. The architecture of Harappan civilization is unique. The technology is unique. Several and good and bad features of Harappan Mesopotamian culture were not seen in Mesopotamia were not seen in Harappa. Many of Harappan things were not seen in Mesopotamia. The relation was strictly a trader's relation. Genetic archaeology data suggests that Harappans were close to the farmers of Iran, but their genetic signature does not go beyond that. They were not people who wrote Vedic literature, we know that for sure. For one, Vedic literature is very strong on horse, and Vedic literature explicitly says that they are talking about a horse with 27 ribs, because Harappans have asses, and asses have only 26 ribs in the spinal cord. And the Vedic people are very particular that we don't worship this asses with 27 ribs, we worship the horse that has 27 ribs. There are no cities in Rugved. Various attempts have been done to try and retrofit it, but it doesn't work. Rugved people essentially ate barley, which is not the primary crop of India, while Harappans ate rice and wheat. And there are other evidences. So one of the ways of looking at civilization and development is to look at this. You start with about 10,000 BC when they are hunter-gatherers. By about 7,000, when hunter-gathering became area requirement becomes very large, they reach saturation, then they tend to start farming. Then they remain semi-nomadic, both hunting and farming, until that gives you the maximum resource it can. Then they come up with larger settlements and organization. When that saturates, they go into urbanization, because urbanization is most efficient in terms of value for money. And then suddenly collapse for reasons that we do not understand. Okay, and they simply scatter all over the place. And this is typically what happens when demographic pressure becomes maximum for this kind of lifestyle, when resource available is maximally optimized and demand for technologies comes in, people go through a phase transition into other forms of culture. Over here, the script comes over here, and the script, I'll show you where the script disappears. Anyway, why did this fall occur is something that you can argue indefinitely. We really, like I said, have no evidence. Demographic pressure, sudden changes in environment, failure to come up with new technologies or ideologies, a whole bunch of things can be done. But we really do not know. So this is how the Harappan population goes. So this is again 7,000 BC, 2000 BC. And what you have in blue color are the urban sites. What you have in red color are the rural sites. And you can see the script appears here, the script disappears here. And about the time that the script disappears, even the urbanization disappears. So this is the Gujarat region, this is the Indus region, and this is the Yamuna region. And you can see that the number of urban sites declines dramatically around the time the script disappears. The semi-urban site or rural sites do tend to survive for a little, but eventually they disappear. And you identify Harappan sites as being Harappan because they should have 2, 3 or 4 of the standard 14 technologies. There are a lot of non-Harappan villages also amongst them, but they do not show any of the classical Harappan urbanization. You can do something more. You can say, what are the important parameters for which? So here we have a list of 26 parameters, and we talk about how important was it to nomads or to rural people or to urban people and so on. And you can take these 26 parameters of cultural parameters and evaluate them for different phases of their life, and then you can make a network diagram. And it turns out that in the earliest phases, what essentially counts is the population density, the use of transport to hunt, a bit on the leadership, integration amongst the people, and sensitivity to environment. Other parameters don't matter. Then from nomad, when you go to settlement farming, essentially now some of the other parameters disappear, but population density, expertise in farming, and so on becomes more important. So environment, population density, external threat, and expertise become important. When you go urban, lots of new parameters come up. You have to worry about integration of population, stratification, housing, religious parameters, internal communication, sciences, in terms of technology development, mathematics, and so on. A whole bunch of parameters come up where writing becomes a part of that story. And when you are post-urban, many of these settlements, many of these parameters disappear, and you are reduced to a fewer set of parameters where expertise and metal now become central to the story. So you can look at these kind of issues to say where the writing appeared. And writing appears along with leadership quality, somewhat similarly important in this network of parameters that define life. Religion comes to the center, population density more or less is the center of the focus of the entire urbanization, while writing and leadership are still peripheral. They are still, not everybody writes, not everybody reads, and it is still an exclusive business of the elite. Another interesting thing about Harappan civilization, like I said, that the spread of 1.5 million square kilometers is not uniform. So what I have here is that you take each site and count the number of sites that are there from each site, and then you make a co-add all together. So typically if you have a site over here, typically within about first 20-30 kilometers you will have another site. Then there is a big khai, if you wish, and then around 400 kilometers you get a second peak of sites. So essentially the distribution of population is not uniform. There could be some bias, but not so much, because this is across all the periods. Searching for sites. There are no, so I don't think that there's been a systematic attempt like that, because some of these sites are typically a few hundred meters. So you would look for a neighbor. The question that comes up is, what is the catchment area that a big city requires? Okay. So for example, Mumbai and Pune are two cities that I can think of which are about 300 kilometers apart. If you try to put a city in the middle of the two, the resource stretch would be so much that it would not be possible to make it exist. Okay, because urban populations require a huge catchment area.
So it is like saying Chennai and Bangalore are 300 kilometers apart, but Vellore is more or less in the middle. So I think Mumbai and Pune are separated by the Western Ghats. That's the reason.
Yeah, that is part of the story. But what of the story is also so Mumbai and Surat, for example, we are still essentially in the same plateau. Or in the Konkan, we have Goa on the south. Some are geographic parameters will definitely play a role. But so for example, in between Mumbai and Pune, there are Khandala and others which will not get full development. You try to fully development the resource crunch that they will take in terms of vegetables, milk, garbage, etc. will make it impossible. And you see that here. That's all I'm saying. So what I have here is multiple graphs over multiple periods. This was 5000 BC going to 3500 BC and so on and so forth. And this is the peak period of Harappan civilization, and then subsequently, and this gap remains. So if you look at the social dynamics of it, this is the peak civilization period where the distance is much larger actually. Okay, and writing appears in this red phase 3000 to 2500 BC, after which in fact patterns settle. This is about a 200 kilometer gap.
So we find the number of sites. You mean like there are 10,000 urban sites in one between 400? I didn't get that. What is number of sites?
Number of sites is essentially okay. So what happens here is that we have defined that anything that is more than half a square kilometer in area is called an urban site.
Okay.
And this is the number of the area. So there are, for example, about the biggest site has an area of about 7 square kilometer. Here the biggest site has about same 7 kilometers. But in the Yamuna region, the biggest sites have almost an area of 15 kilometers. The size of that.
So yeah. So going back to what you are showing. So if you say 10,000 sites, it can be or a 4,000 site can be one contiguous cluster.
Yes. So the clustering when you do, this is what you get. This is what you get. So if you say nearest only 100 kilometer sites are connected, you get 4 different clusters. If you say, okay, connection goes up to 200 kilometers, now these sites are appearing bigger and intermediate villages also start getting into clusters. You need to say the connectivity exists up to 500 kilometers for all the sites to get connected. So there are clearly clusters in the urbanization. And the reason why clustering and urbanization is interesting is because even though there is clusterization, there is still a very standardized use of technology and script. Okay, people living completely differently in different environments, like I said, across the Ghats and stuff like that, still use the same script, and that is what makes it fascinating. Middle East and Harappa, Nisha showed this example for you in far more detail, where they use the same script to write something that seems to be completely different, because grammatically it is different. And Middle East does have large tablets, but they don't have anything in which Harappan script is written. They have this beautiful circular script pieces, some of which are found in Harappa, but very few. Okay, and the script from seals from West Asia. So if there is a dictionary, if there is really a Rosetta Stone of Indus Script, it's not going to be in India, it's going to be in West Asia, because they need it to translate. Somehow within the country, within the landmass of South Asia, there were other ways in which conveyed the compactness of information. So there is a seal that Nisha showed. Writing on seals is believed to have been transmitted to Harappa from West Asia from Harappa. Okay, it is clearly therefore that Harappan civilization developed as an isolated group, and yet they had very close contact with each of these. It's almost like the city-states of Greece, but the area of Greece was so much smaller. The writing and other cultural parameters were highly standardized across the entire region. There is no sign by the way of religious places in Harappa. So we don't even know if they worshipped any gods, and if they did, how did they do that? It indicates a very high level of standardization, which was driven by consensus and not by war. This is not easy to achieve, and therefore that remains one of the biggest dilemma when you look at the script, that the very thinking process is very different from the thinking process that would subsequently follow. Problems with decipherment, Nisha has highlighted them. They are manifold. The writing is cryptic. We don't know if there is a language underneath it, and if it is a language, whether it is one language or multiple languages, or how is the coding done. It probably could not be a single language, for the obvious reason that there are these clusters, all of them following the same writing, and language does not remain standardized over hundreds of kilometers. The syntax has the same flexibility as language, and the writing is hardly standardized. There are no bilingual texts, there is no literary data, there are no poems or anything in Harappan, and there is no clear evidence of continuity. And like I said, 100 odd failed attempts have been there. Harappan script is mathematically shown to be highly structured and similar to at least a formal language, if not a formal language writing in itself. We know how to write in Harappan script, but even if we don't know what to write, in the sense that Nisha and I could have worked out saying that, look, let us assign this meaning to this sign, let us assign this meaning to this sign, and we could have exchanged notes which were grammatically correct with Harappan script. But that doesn't mean that they assign these values to these signs. So we know how to write in Harappan script, but we don't know how to read. Disappearance of writing, appearance and disappearance both are dramatic. Appearance indicates the rise of a civilization. There are a lot of other evidences which show that there is a certain rise of civilization. Disappearance could be for multiple reasons. Probably the writing was restricted to trained elites, and the training system broke down. Maybe writing was no longer needed. Maybe it was replaced by a simple form of writing which we have so far not been able to recognize or identify. And the disappearance apparently is as sudden as the decay of the culture. And in most cases, what happens is that when a city is depopulated, it is the rich who go first and then the poor people migrate. Here it is reverse. The entire townships along the river bank, where presumably poorer people stayed because of flooding, etc., go out first, and then the outer regions go out. Understanding the reason for the disappearance is a part of the story of trying to understand what Harappans wrote. And this is the language model. Somebody we were talking about lunch table today. Then there are various ideas of what kind of languages existed in India and how they transmitted and so on. But whether they were related to Harappans at all, we do not know. And already there are various evidences of different kinds of languages. While there is evidence of movement, there is really no evidence of other technology. So Harappans, for example, had no iron. It's a completely Bronze Age technology. They never reached iron, and they never had horses. Writing is highly quadratic, suggesting centralized teaching. Flexibility is that of linguistic writing. Long distance trade could be an obvious reason why this was done. So there is somebody who has done an analysis where he has taken the raw material from Harappan sites, done an elemental analysis and to see where the minings goes. And some of the mines from which they mine this material go all the way to Afghanistan and beyond, like northern Afghanistan. They go to deep into the Gangetic Plain and even South India. So they were mining from all over the place. So trade would obviously be something. So there could be things like sending rice to Mohenjo-daro written on these things. You need, and to write even these kind of things, you need near linguistic flexibility. It is unlikely that the writing includes literary works for obvious reasons. The relation between motifs and written material is not well understood. Bhaskar, of course, has some very good ideas, but they need to be tested. The script is used to express heterogeneous information. Nisha showed you these 9 clusters into which the linguistic writing can be broken. So clearly not just one kind of information was being written in that. The Harappan script had multiple uses and multiple users and a centralized education system that made sure that all this information got conveyed properly. But there are larger issues. Why write is the first question. Writing involves cognitive and physical processes of both. To translate information thought into symbol and references is not so easy. That is the earliest script tend to be more like Chinese, where they use an individual symbol for individual entity. It is highly sensitive to the information you wish to convey. And so, for example, in Indian languages, you will not find too many words for snow, while in the among the Eskimos, there are some 200 words for snow because they needed that. We didn't need that. So a system of writing relies on many of the structures of knowledge that it wishes to represent, but the designing is independent of the language. Written language may take on characteristic distinction, distinction shape depending on what you are writing. And writing is also a series of physically inscribed objects. You are now attending a particular set of design to a particular meaning, and that requires a major intellectual change. Writing systems do not themselves constitute a language, but a convention that is meant to inform other human beings over time and space. A commonly agreed convention has to be central to that story. We need to get a better hold of the way Harappans thought and the way they were thinking and behaving before we can make sense of what was the purpose of the writing. So archaeologists have given us a fair amount of data, or at least ideally we would of course like 15,000 lines, but at least they have given whatever they could. We know about the syntax, we know about their sign modifiers, we know about the signs relation with other signs and so on. We know that you can get computers to learn it. Nisha showed you that model of machine language which can unsupervised learning, which can give you 75% accuracy about predicting signs. Okay. However, it has to be put in the context of the cultural aspects to make make sense of it, because they seem to have a fundamentally different way of thinking. The final answer to Harappan writing may well depend on how we understand the rise and especially the decline of the civilization to know how they were thinking and approaching the subject. There are some indications, including crude Harappan bronzes in Maharashtra, some suggestions of material from Harappan culture being available in South India, some also on down the Gangetic plains, not just Yamuna, all the way down the Gangetic plain and stuff like that. But that evidence is small. It is not overwhelming to give you a continuity. So eastward migration data is there, southward migration data is there, but what they carried was very little of the original culture. Genetic data can help us find some patterns, but large-scale genetic data is yet to come. We only know that India consists of Indo-Europeans, Dravidians and Austroasians, but we really do not know in great detail to make a map of it. And then there's a possible scenario of decline of civilization we like to know. So what are the possible scenarios? Drought is one of them, disease is another thing, economic collapse, like I said, is another thing, collapse of social structure is another thing, disintegration of the society is another thing, dispersal of population. But we need some we still do not have a clear idea of what it is, because villages are very vulnerable to minor changes in environment, while cities are rugged. Cities are horrible for long-term changes in environment. You have to just empty the city. But short-term changes, they are generally well protected because they have made lakes for themselves, water protection sources and garbage sources and so on. So urban center can handle 1 or 2 years of monsoon uncertainty. After all, Bangalore will survive this lack of monsoon, and Chennai survived a bad monsoon a few years ago. On the other hand, villages tend to get decimated. So urban centers have a lot of rigidity or inertia, depending on how you want to put it. So we need to map out their original movement, subsequent movement. We need much more genetic data. We need to know whether they have relation to the later tribals of India and so on. We know Harappan civilization was not destroyed by violence. We know there is no evidence of standing army, which is truly surprising. They seem to have existed almost like the city-states of Greece, but even city-states of Greece eventually fought each other. There is no destruction of cities. So, for example, if you go to Dholavira, there is an evidence that in the middle of their urbanization, there was a major fire that seems to have destroyed the whole village, but it was a whole city, but it was rebuilt on top of the old one. So there is a whole layer of ash mound dated to middle of Dholavira's lifetime. It seems to have been a steep but systematic decline in activity. So this is the graph that I just showed you, and we really do not know why. One suggestion is that maybe they were taken over by, they became part of the Vedic culture, but that is difficult. 27 ribbed horse I mentioned, highly urbanized cities I mentioned, no clear indication of who they worship. Harappans ate a much wider variety of foodstuff than is described in Rig Veda. There is no Vedic diet is far more limited than what the Harappans ate. The landscape described in Vedic literature is more like that of Central Asia rather than India. The rains are central to Harappan civilization, while Vedic people do not appreciate rain. They appreciate ice that is being warmed rather than rains bringing water. By the time Vedic culture comes to India, Harappan civilization seems to have declined. So the classical age for Vedic period culture in India is about 1500 BC, which is past the Harappan urbanization. The second scenario is that Harappans migrated to the south, and that Harappan script represents Dravidian signature. But the time difference is too much. The rise of Dravidian culture is much later than death of Harappan civilization. Sangam literature is about 800-900 BC or so. The distance between these regions is very large, and what happened to intermediate regions? Large landmass of Narmada, etc. is an issue. There are only very few examples, if at all, like I said, of replication of Harappan technology. So basically, one of the most interesting and fully explored aspects of Harappan civilization is its connection with older Mesopotamian Harappan culture, Sumerian cultures. They are slightly older than Harappans. Many Harappans seem to have come through the Bolan Pass through southern Iranian farmers. This culture is much older and must have influenced the Harappans, because there is genetic evidence of farmers of South Iran being similar to the Harappan people. We know that Harappans had close contact with them. Stylistic seals were in existence before Harappan came into being, but they made with circular seals. The classical Harappan seals are not to be seen anywhere. Writing was originally invented in some 800 years, even if you want to be very generous. And there are 30 seals in West Asia, which show Indus grammar, Indus signs being written. So maybe there are some connection there. So what are the Harappan people? What did they write? Was it Dravidian language writing? So Mahadevan, for example, spent a lifetime trying to see if it is Dravidian, and the evidence is not clear. There are some who have suggested they are label tags, name identifiers, entity identifiers. Again, that does not work. There is somebody who suggested it is purely numeric, trivial to show it doesn't work. Somebody who has claimed that it is random gibberish, which is also nonsense. Some people have tried to read Sanskrit into this literature, and none of these are consistent with the syntactic analysis that Nisha presented. So how do you go from here, or where do you go from here? It is now clear that writing is grammatically precise and versatile. The signs seem to be a mix of individual and compound signs. It has the flexibility of linguistic writing. It has a known grammar which is now reasonably well understood, if not fully understood. No current model comes close to answering this question. No way forward. The only one way forward to look, the only way to go forward probably may be synonyms or some other things. With computational linguistics, we may have a clearer idea of signs and the grammatical synonyms and signs that can replace other signs and so on. So Nisha showed you this whole bunch of synonyms. When you put part of this string into unsupervised learned computer program and ask them, they tell you that the replacement sign can be any of these three. In another case, it says any of these three. On third case, it says any of these two and so on. So these are all grammatical synonyms of the Indus script. But grammatical synonyms does not mean that meaning synonyms. So there could be linguistic synonyms. They essentially mean the same thing. They could be purely grammatical synonyms. Words that mean completely different things but are grammatically identical. Or synonyms that look different in particular should be of great interest. For example, I have food is one thing and I have chocolate is another thing. Chocolate and food will both turn up as synonyms in your unsupervised learning, but the meanings are different. On the other hand, I have clothes to wear or I have no clothes to wear are more than just grammatical synonyms. There is something profound to it. I have food to eat or I had food is another way in which synonyms may appear in slightly different combination of signs. Within this lies a pattern that can reveal some of the patterns of writing and give more constraints to future development decipherments. It should be noted that writing was almost certainly not for single purpose. Only Nisha showed you these 9 clusters. However, in no language are there two synonyms that have identical meanings. Synonyms have similar meanings, but why would you invent two words to mean exactly the same thing? So even those synonyms would not be having identical meaning. Another thing you can look at is that there are many examples where the same sign is repeated twice, which doesn't happen in a normal language. So why are these sign pairs? Sometimes there are triplets together. In many cases, we have seen that the signs repeat themselves with itself immediately or at a distant location, but we don't know why. And if you probably didn't notice it because Nisha flashed it fast, but in the 9 clusters that she showed you, one of the clusters clearly has this doublets of 345 in them. Which of these signs are shown these characteristics? And not all the signs appear in pairs, only some signs appear in pairs, and we need to worry about why. Then there are complex signs like the same human figure with all kinds of shapes and carriers and all that. We need to identify these signs to which additives are made, signs to which other signs are added, signs to which only additives are made, and we need to show that. Nisha showed you that this combining of signs was not shorthanding. It was not written to compress the writing, but there was the compounded signs clearly had a different meaning because the grammatical environment in which they appear is very different. We need to get these isolated and studies. Then the size that have add-ons, again, Nisha told you that there are 21 of those which need to be looked at. Not all signs have additives, only some of the signs have additives, and some signs have some additives, some signs have some other additives. These are the elements that need to be looked at. And there also appear to be fewer signs where this needs to happen. So welcome to the problem. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, you can ask. Otherwise, you can go and take.
Thanks, Mayank. Questions, comments? Yep.
Yes.
Sir, in one of the earlier slides, you had mentioned how this obsession with miniaturization is unique to this particular culture. And it reminded me of an example from current day, which is that of the semiconductor industry. That much of the advancements that we see in the chips is because of the distance between two transistors being reduced steadily from hundreds of nanometers to now today it's 3 nanometers.
Correct.
And so thinking along the same lines, could these seals represent the pinnacle of conveying information from that era?
In principle, it's possible that they originally drew big things and then eventually made them more and more compact, but there is no evidence of these bigger pieces. When it suddenly appears as miniatures. So it seems also there is no physical reason why they would make a big thing small, except like I said, to carry it. It may be easier to carry and so on. But these are urban centers. They don't move around very easily. So why would they choose miniatures is something we don't know. It is not technology driven. On the other hand, a lot of technology must have driven these kind of structures.
Thank you.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts. I mean, one is the reason we only have these small seals could be that larger texts were on cloth or animal hide or something and has not survived.
In principle, yes, of course. But then the pens with which they wrote would have survived. We have seen very little of any writing equipment which could have written on larger
But
text.
if they used quills or something, those wouldn't have survived either, right?
So for example, we have seen long pen-like structures, and some people have even claimed they are pens. You can find markings on the stone where they apparently tested the gold and so on.
Okay.
But there is no evidence of anything big having been written. And well, in principle, you are right, but we have absolutely no evidence on that. Leather could have been one, because leather is a big industry in Harappa. Paper, I don't think they had, because in the sense that paper making requires a certain processing and stuff like that, which there is no evidence of paper. But they could have had leather. And I don't think anything in leather has survived from Harappan civilization.
The other question I was thinking, if there's an ubiquitous script, I mean, if these add-ons are like vowels, a lot of scripts actually don't include the vowels. I mean, some writing systems only have the consonants.
Yes.
So from the purpose of trying to decode it, supposing you strip off all the add-ons and only look at, you assume that whatever is left is a consonant, would some kind of pattern emerge from that? Has anyone tried?
So that is when we are reduced to 35 signs from Harappan civilization. And the grammar of those 35 signs need to be systematically analyzed. We were just amused to see them as 35 different signs, but we haven't quite got around to looking at these so-called
The grammar.
core signs of this grammar. Plus, there is an additional problem that now it is not just a question of additives. Some signs are merged. And that makes life very miserable.
Okay, thanks.
Bhaskar, comment to me? There. This is more of a comment than question, really. The thing is, the data set available for any kind of the data set available to you all for any kind of analysis today is actually a very limited data set. Not in the sense of samples missing, but in the sense of a lot of background information missing. And a lot of this background information actually decides what to begin with writing is. For instance, the so-called writing that we see on Indus is really of two types. One is freestyle scrawling on pottery graffiti and copper artifacts. The other is really on seals and seal impressions, which are not freestyle writing at all, which is probably on a little slab. It's scrawled first with a softer or a sharper implement, and then it's actually scooped out, carved out, right? And so there have been many attempts to understand direction of writing from the scooping. Scooping does not have to begin in any one direction. It can begin anywhere on a seal, depending on the ergonomic aspects of how a seal carver actually digs the material out. So there's a lot of background information that is actually missing for conclusive productive analysis, such as one would like to undertake today. Which, however, does not mean there is absence of evidence. In fact, I believe there's more information than necessary today to actually understand the complete contents of the Indus seal impressions.
And here I don't distinguish the visual content from the textual content. And the complete disassociation between the two is probably the reason for the delay in our understanding of the Indus material itself. Because it's kind of unsuspected that there could be a connection between this and that. In fact, some of them have actually been dismissed, saying there is no connection between this and that. This is something else. This is a magical symbol. This is religious, totemic, or something like that. And this is completely independent of that. No. If you look at it closely, there is a very clear one-to-one correspondence. And on many seals, there is actually an A for apple kind of an explanation. There are 33 seals in Indus out of 5,538 artifacts that we get today. On 33 seals, the sign is not written on top of the animal, in front of the animal. These 33 actually show a direct relationship between an A for apple kind of relationship. And once with that, what we can do is we can assemble a Saussurian set, a pre-linguistic set, non-phonetic set, saying that, okay, this sign is actually legitimately a sign because it has a random correspondence with the visual and have a Saussurian set. And from the Saussurian set only, we can actually read further on. I mean, that's roughly the understanding that we get today from going through these limited corpuses available.
Slightly unrelated, but if you look at so if you talk about the prosperity of the civilization, does it like vary significantly across space? Is it like each site was comparably prosperous?
No, that's okay. So there are 14 characteristics that define the Harappan civilization. One interesting thing is the bricks. The house, the bricks with which they made their houses, etc., had an exact 1:2:4 ratio, and that is across the board, across the 1 million square kilometers, you find it the same. The knives that they used were also highly standardized. So there is a very high degree of standardization. Orthogonal streets, etc., are also there. Jewelry decorations are also very similar. So some sites must have been richer, some must have been poorer, but stylistically they remain the same. Also, there are sites like Mohenjo-daro. We talk about a great Egyptian architecture, but Mohenjo-daro is a completely artificial site. A mount was created in the middle of a river bed, and then the entire city was built on top of that mount. And it has orthogonal streets and stuff like that. So there must have been poverty and there must have been richness. For example, each of these sites has a citadel where the powerful, potentially the king or whoever was staying, and the rest of the people lived in much smaller, much poorer houses. So there was definitely proper economic stratification in that.
So is it viable that the failure of one site, one centralized system could lead to collapse of something like a cascade?
Yeah, so one obvious thinking is that that Gaggar Akra that I showed you, probably it came from the Himalayan mountain ranges, apparently, and an earthquake somewhere either at the top or at the middle level made Yamuna go to the east instead of coming south any further. So it stopped, a major river stopped feeding this culture. So this entire all the urban centers in one region had collapsed. They probably tried and settled in the other, in the Indus plain, overpopulated and destroyed their culture also. That is one of the ideas. The second is some unknown disease ran through the place. The third is that they were dependent essentially on commerce with Europe, with West Asia. The problem is, for every evidence that you show me in favor of that idea, I will show you another evidence that doesn't agree with that idea. That is a problem.
And you mentioned something about, generally you see that the rich usually gets wiped out and the poor migrate. But here it's the opposite.
Sorry?
You mentioned that in this case it's the opposite.
Yes.
Right? What was the basis?
Reason we don't know. We have the idea is that generally if a place becomes difficult to live, people start finding, rich people would start finding other places to go and live where it is more comfortable. And they would have the resources to do that. While the poor would essentially try to trudge on as much as they can in the given environment. Here what happens is that apparently the less fortunate seem to have left the city before the rich did. So, for example, there are no evidences of dead bodies lying here and there. There are no undisposed bodies except of people who came later just wandering at the site and died. Those kind of rare examples exist. But in general, large scale unattended bodies are not found in any of these sites. Forget about wounds, not even by illness or age. So people seem to have migrated out in groups. The entire lot went away, which is unusual.
Also, the number of artifacts that you find in these sites, is it unusually low for these particular regions, or is this what you expect in any archaeological survey?
That is the question. So, for example, per square foot, if you are per 1,000 of population, whether you find more artifacts in Mesopotamia or India, that's the question you are asking.
I mean, do you significantly find lower artifacts in these regions compared to, say, some other?
I don't know the answer. I really don't. In the sense that if you are asking me for per 1,000 population, did Mesopotamians have more variety of artifacts, etc., compared to Harappans? I don't know the answer to that. And I don't know I mean, I could guess the answer, and I think it would be comparable, but I won't bet much on it.